And let's turn attention now to Africa and in Mali, where the enthronement of democratic governance is facing serious challenges. The country was supposed to hold presidential and parliamentary elections next month, but the military-led government has pushed that back by up to 5 years. A major coalition of political parties in Mali, known as the National Committee for the Salvation of the People, has described the plan as unilateral and unreasonable and a violation of the country's transition charter. We have details in this report.
The transitional government had initially agreed to hold presidential and legislative elections in February 2022 amid pressure from the economic community of West African states regional bloc. Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop submitted the new plans to ECOWAS on Saturday following a national reform conference boycotted by political parties and social organizations. The plans envisage a 6-month to 5-year prolongation of the transitional period starting on January 1 and reversing a pledge to have an 18-month transition government. ECOWAS, which has threatened to impose further sanctions on Mali's ruling military government for postponing the elections, is due to hold an extraordinary summit on the situation in Mali in Ghana's capital, Accra, on the 9th of January. Mali's military ruler, Colonel Assimi Goïta, has effectively led Mali since an August 2020 coup removed former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta after weeks of street protests against perceived corruption and the government's handling of a years-long conflict with armed groups. Under pressure from former colonial power France and Mali's neighbors, Colonel Goïta pledged Mali would return to civilian rule after holding presidential and legislative elections in February this year. But he staged a de facto second coup in May 2021 when he pushed aside the interim president who had taken over after Keïta's removal and took the job himself. Colonel Goïta initially pledged that the February elections would be held as planned, but the government has since cited persistent insecurity in Mali's restive north as the reason for its decision to postpone the polls. Large parts of the country's territory remained out of the government's control as self-defense militias and armed men, affiliates of Al-Qaeda and ISIL, meted violence on civilians and soldiers. The violence has spilled into the neighboring countries of Niger and Burkina Faso, destabilizing the wider Sahel region and leaving a massive humanitarian crisis in its wake. Meanwhile, France has thousands of soldiers deployed across the Sahel to battle armed groups, but it has been scaling down its presence in northern Mali nearly 9 years after its military intervention.
And for more on the Malian leadership situation, I am now being virtually joined by an international affairs analyst, Paul Ejime. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Same to you. We are back to this conversation, unfortunately, not in the way that we all expected. We all thought that by now, or most people thought that by now, the elections would be in full gear. It was supposed to hold in February. But the military government is now blaming that on the security situation and asking for 5 more years. Are you surprised by this? And do you think that the security reason is valid?
So, well, it shouldn't come as a surprise because, you know, it is the same political instability and what do you call it, people not being sincere to themselves and the military actually learning from the politicians. Because if you look across the region, you talk about tenure elongation and then people tampering with the national constitution to either gain power or to remain in power. And then so the military are now saying, listen, they have to do some work. And let's be honest, if actually they wanted to do a genuine transition, they have to make some reforms in the constitution and then the electoral laws, and then also get some institutional reforms that will be able to withstand all the assaults that democracy is now facing in West Africa. So I wouldn't say there is no justification for asking for 5 years. I think they are using that as a bargaining chip, knowing that perhaps ECOWAS and the international community will probably bring down that timeline or timetable to about 12 months or something like that. I think the minister said they were taking the upper limit, knowing that they probably will not have their way. But they have put ECOWAS in a very dicey situation. They cannot enforce having Mali to do the election next month as planned. And so they are now caught between how long will they allow, because it is dicey. And the ECOWAS leaders themselves are to blame because they've not been fine. They've not been forthright in the way they are dealing with their political and their constitutional coups that is causing problem in West Africa.
And many international analysts also agree with you that this might just be posturing for further negotiations, that probably the military isn't aiming for 5 years. But you mentioned ECOWAS, and ECOWAS did promise that more sanctions if there were no plans for a February election. But when you look at what's playing out, whether in Sudan or in Mali, do you think that ECOWAS understand the geopolitics in these recent times within the region?
Good question, because they don't seem, and it will, you know, let's just use that term. There is a disconnect between ECOWAS leaders and the local forces or local factors. And that is what the gap that they have to bridge if they want really to have an impact on Mali. By the way, the military cum civilian leaders, they have asked for the chief mediator, Nigeria's former president, Jonathan, to come to Mali tomorrow on the 5th. And then that is before this summit. I think they are playing their hands, knowing that ECOWAS does not really have much leverage, as it were. If you impose sanctions, the ordinary people are going to suffer it the more. So what are you going to do? You cannot insist. You can't impose. You can't force people to go into an election. I mean, what will it be? So now you are left with negotiating how long the delay will be. And one is just saying that the practical thing will be perhaps 12 months or thereabouts, or maybe 18 months that they originally asked for. But that will be stretching it. So they are using it as bargaining chip. And France is not helping matters. Remember that France has forces in the Sahel that they are now drawing down, you know, reducing the number. And Malians are going now, this is forcing Mali to go to Russia to ask for support. And France is saying, and others are saying, no, you cannot do that. But if you, they feel that they've been abandoned by France, because much of the forces that are in the Sahel are helping out in northern Mali, which is really where there is no government. The government in Bamako does not have authority over what is happening in much of what is happening in northern Mali. So this is what they have a point.
You raised a point that I don't want to lose that point, the issue of France. I also know that Germany is also reconsidering its role in Mali. But as we speak, you also mentioned Russia. Russia has said that its trainers are in Mali in respect to a memorandum of understanding or bilateral understanding between both countries. But how complicated does that make things for France and ECOWAS to have Russia? Because it does now seem that like Mali is leaning towards Russia. How complicated does that make things for ECOWAS and France?
Well, it's complicated, but ECOWAS did not, one of the communiques, they were talking about Mali not allowing some external, defense or military. But they don't have the right to do that. Mali is a sovereign state. And if they are in trouble, there is insecurity that has been there since 2013 or thereabout, has not been able to, and by the way, also you also have some 14 to 15,000 UN peacekeeping force there, MINUSMA. And if all these forces are there, they've not been able to end the insecurity in Mali. You know, you ask, what are they doing there? So for France to be insisting that Mali cannot go and to meet any other country, that is part of that, you know, continuation of colonization that people have been talking about. Why do you insist that you are the only one that will have leverage and control over their currency, over their resources, and now their defense? I don't think it's practicable. I don't think it's rational. But at the same time, one will not want West Africa to become, you know, a field for all comers.
And that's why, I guess, that's why all eyes will be on that extraordinary summit on January the 9th by ECOWAS. We'll see the decision that ECOWAS will make, and I'm sure you and I will have this conversation all over again. Thank you so much for your time, as always, International Affairs Analyst Paul Ejime.
Thank you for having me.